This is Ender 217, and you are listening to the Rebuttal to the Rebuttal. Let me start out by saying that I have no need or intent to blanketly defend Kent Hovind, or anyone else who may agree with me for that matter. It's really not necessary for someone to be able to defend the statements of people who agree with him simply based on the fact that they agree. It would be counterproductive for me to do that, because just because someone may be right, which naturally if they agree with me they are, doesn't mean they can accurately or effectively argue their position. Now, I freely admit without any damage to my own beliefs that Kent Hovind makes mistakes, and substantial ones, but you also make substantial mistakes, and it's not fair for me to sit by while other people listening to you may think that these arguments that you've given are legitimate or well-backed, especially when you state things as fact that are simply not. So, I am here to point out these said substantial mistakes, and you should just accept that in the spirit of reciprocity in which it was meant. First we come to the part of the rebuttal, your rebuttal, where you said that this certain section of the population curve was not part of a normal exponential curve. Now, it's a well-documented sociological fact that populations, human populations, all over the world, in varying countries with varying levels of development, follow an exponential population curve. That is one of the merits of the exponential curve, is that its rate of increase is dependent on its current value. Now, probably one of the main reasons for this is that the ability of a human population to support itself is, in fact, based on how many humans you have, how many people you have to support. It doesn't matter if you're in the foraging level of the economy, because at that level, you have a very small population and you have the option of spreading out. Alternatively, if you're at the agrarian level of society, the number of people you have is how many workers you have for the farms to produce food. People are their own support system. That is why we follow an exponential curve. The most obvious implication of this is that if you know what kind of curve it is you're dealing with, you can then apply curve fitting to backwards extrapolate, so to speak. It allows you to see from where you are in the interval that you have data for and project forwards or backwards into those areas and make estimates about what you don't know. So the simple point is that it's legitimate to fit curves this way and make estimates about what came before. Now, I'm sorry if those estimates coincide with a biblical history of humanity as opposed to an evolutionary one, but I can't change the facts. That is your job. Next we come to density wave theory. And the point to be made here is brief. Density wave theory is a legitimate model for spiral galaxy and how it is that they maintain their shape. And the point is that density wave theory causes no problem whatsoever for creation. It helps evolution dodge a potential problem from the way we thought things were before, but it doesn't cause any problems or lend any credence to either theory. I think this is also the most appropriate time to point out that the use of the word rubbish, if you are not English, is pretentious. That's just for you. That's got nothing to do with the debate. That's just take that, chew on it, see how it feels. Next we come to the issue of Sirius A, which you stated was red. Not a lot to say here except that it is in fact a white star. So maybe take a minute to corroborate your Google image search next time to make sure that what you're seeing is in fact, true. It's also worth reiterating here that historical sources up until about 150-200 AD unanimously described Sirius A as being red. So we're still in contention on that point. Now, I'm sorry, but I just really can't let this go. Uranus jokes are things you make in, like, second grade when you're learning about the planets. I mean, come on. Really? Now this one brings me to the rings of Saturn, which you erroneously claimed would last as long as the shepherd moons will, and that the billions of years since the planet was formed is no problem for keeping the rings in place. Now the problem here is that even evolutionist astronomers acknowledge that the rings of Saturn could not have been formed more than 30 million years ago, because being composed primarily of water, ice, and frozen ammonia, they would have vaporized or been eaten away completely by meteoroids if they were much older than that. This next part is about lunar recession. Now you claim without any backup that this lunar recession would have been much slower in the past, obviously to avoid the problem of hitting the Roche limit and having the moon break up in an untenable orbit. Now, if you would really like to know where this concept of slower recession in the past came from, you would actually have to look at geology and paleontology, because they were the ones who stipulated that because they don't see evidence of megatides, then obviously the moon wasn't so close to cause them. But these people were making these statements based on the assumption that the universe was already billions of years old. So what you run into is a serious circular argument. You can't assume what you're trying to prove in order to prove it. I mean, that's a serious logical error. Now this tells us the useful fact that had the moon been much closer, as the creation model says that it would be, they would have expected to see megatides. So let's do a little thought experiment with this. Bring the radius of the moon in closer, and decrease the rate of spin of the Earth, which is what naturally would happen, regardless of the rate at which you think it would happen. Now, the tides are going to be much higher, because the Earth is closer to pull on the tides. But since the Earth is spinning faster, it is going to offset that angle of the tidal bulge about as much as it would be today. But since the moon is closer, the gravitational torque pulling on the moon from the tidal bulge is going to cause even greater acceleration than we find today. So it's perfectly logical to assume that if the moon was closer in, it would actually be moving at least as fast as it is now, if not faster, away from the Earth. So the end result is that the rate of lunar recession is still a perfectly legitimate argument to use against the concept of an old Earth-Moon system. Then you went on to talk about precession, and how this is the cause for the desertification of the Sahara. But the main problem with this is that the Sahara shares a latitude with, well, a very good portion of the Earth. So, unless all of those other places are also deserts, you can't make the argument that the desertification is a result of the precessional shift. Obviously, more local factors are at play here. And you have to admit that for the creationist model, a timeline of about 4,000 years is awfully coincidental. Of course, this is when Kent Hovind started talking about the Oort cloud, which I'll just point out that you very deftly sidestepped the issue of, and went on to talk about how the Kuiper belt is a perfect explanation for all the short-term comets we see today. Well, that is absolutely true. But the point to be made is that a short-term Kuiper belt comet with an orbit of around 200 years at a maximum would not have survived this long. And you didn't address that at all. So that point remains completely open for refutation. And of course, finally, I really appreciated the irony of you accusing creationists of gross uniformitarianism. since it is evolutionists who make good sport of practicing uniformitarianism to prove long ages. Apparently, you can only apply uniformitarianism if it supports the evolutionary theory. And so it is my pleasure to conclude this rebuttal and encourage you to get back to me and offer further argument for the positions that you untenably tried to hold, and I look forward to hearing from you. Good day, sir.